Hello there, it's Spanners here from the editing lounge. I've just put together this midweek show, and I realised that really in the intro I didn't give you any clue as to what was coming up. We did mention, because we were excited, that we'd be speaking to Steve Lauleta from 2311 NASCAR team, who's invited us to join them the week after Miami. But the main bulk of the show is that we've been talking to Mike Caulfield, and it was a really great chat about the 2016 season, Hamilton versus Rosberg, and I really felt like I was there reliving it with him. But we started the show with a little bit of a strategy corner, looking back at the weekend, because Matt wasn't on for the race review. So a little bit of midweek content. If you can have it on in the background. You know, no pressure. It's just something extra in the week for you. But I do think both the chats were really good, and the chat with Matt, I guess, was fine. Here's the show proper back in the shed. You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. We live F1. Welcome to the sheds for Missed Apex Midweek. I'm your host, Richard Reddy, but my friends call me Spanners. So let's be friends, and Matt's friends call him Matt Trumpets. Hello, Matt.
Yeehaw, giddy up. How's it going, Spanners?
Yeehaw, giddy up. You just leaned into I'm an American. So that'd be like me saying, hello, everybody. I'm just in the middle of making a gravy pie. Would you like to join me for tea and gravy?
Well, yes, but I'm looking forward to our NASCAR content because it is homegrown like apple pie.
Yeah, we just spoke to basically the Zach Brown equivalent in NASCAR, Steve Lauleta from the 2311 NASCAR team. That's the one where Bubba Wallace drives for it. And he's invited us to basically go for all access, press passes, be in the garage during the race. So really, really excited that we're literally going to do that for the next NASCAR race. So he invited you personally as well, Matt.
He did, and I'm super excited about it because if there's one thing I've always wanted was just to be during a race in the garage of a top team, and that's exactly what we're going to get. And it's just going to be eye-opening, I know.
And so we're speaking to Steve at the end of the show. Really interesting half-an-hour interview just to learn a little bit more about another motorsport. And I've always been open, Matt, haven't I, that I'm incredibly bribable. Just invite me to your thing,
yes.
Or send me a hat, and I'll say positive things or be more open to being positive.
Yeah, I mean, you could just send me a DM and tell me something, and I'd be very excited about it. But getting to go to a race, getting to meet the people who put the car on the track, getting to learn about it, and then getting to be in a garage. Can you imagine being in a garage during an actual race for a top team? That's just like, the tension of it. So I'm going to be one of those people invited in from the motorsport that doesn't really know anything about that motorsport. And it was like, why are they there? Oh, look at these That's going to be us.
That's us. That's going to be us. That's going to be so cool. So we are going to be doing that. And interesting you say about DMs, because I think DMs from team members have affected me in the past. So I've had nice ones from Williams. So I'm nice about them. I've only had meanish DMs from people at Aston Martin. So maybe that explains my hostility. Send me a hat and who knows, I'll chill.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't, I can personally vouch for the fact it does not take a lot to change his mind.
No, I'm like a flip-flop in the wind. We're going to be speaking very shortly to Mike Caulfield as well, and he's going to open up about the 2016 season where he was at Mercedes and the teammates were not getting along.
Oh yeah, this is going to be some epic revelations, I hope, because it was such a great season.
Yeah.
I mean, depending on who you rooted for, but if you look at it in totality, it was epic. I think it's the one thing that has kept that is different to what we're seeing now with Red Bull is just the race between those two teammates was epic. And the fact they were on the same team, they weren't really on the same team.
No, not at all. No.
They had the same car and that's it.
Yeah, because that was Rosberg's team. Schumacher had left. Hamilton comes in as the superstar, was clearly favored a little bit in 2023. It's super close in 2014. But then 2015, Hamilton just pounds him like a bong. Beats him like a drum, that's what you say, in 2015. Yeah. And then 2016 is the culmination of that before he retires.
Yeah, I mean, Rosberg literally threw the kitchen sink at it. And I'm looking into the details of exactly what was in that sink when it got thrown.
Yeah, so that's coming up. But you weren't part of the race review, and I think when you've not been able to do the race reviews, it's made sense for us to do them shortly after the races. It doesn't make sense to have you up all through the night and have you finish recording with us then at 8 a.m. and then you go to work. That doesn't make sense. I think what we miss out on is, the little bit of the strategy stuff that you bring to us. So if you're unable to make the race review, I thought, I'll get you on here before we speak to Mike and Steve and do a little bit of a strategy corner with Matt Trumpet. The strategy didn't matter in the end, but there was almost a shadow race that got wiped out by the safety car.
Well, yeah, I mean, you had sort of this very interesting thing developing on track where you had some of the backmarker teams, and I'm looking particularly at Haas and Sauber, going for a very early pit stop, like around lap 8 or lap 9, and going for the undercut, which was big. And in fact, we saw at the end of the race, Hulkenberg in P10, and that was entirely down to him undercutting the Alpine of Ocon and who came in the lap afterwards. Hulkenberg had the place and gained the time and was still ahead of him when the safety car happened. So he earned that position with his first pit stop and baked it in. And when the safety car came in, that flattened everybody's strategy. So at the back, you definitely had some early stoppers and people reacting to it. You had Red Bull in the middle who stopped bang on. The Pirelli prediction was a two-stopper, like medium, hard, I think, or, hard, medium, hard, or whatever they do. But they literally said, oh, stop one lap 14. And that's when the Red Bulls came in. And then you had the safety car and you had Ferrari out there going for a very different strategy, which was basically plan D for, let's see what happens if we do this for Leclerc. Yeah.
I know you don't listen to the shows you're not on. So did you notice that the race engineer, Xavi, gave away what plan D was? So he started to say one stop and then stopped himself. He goes, okay, so we're going for plan D.
Yeah, well, I mean, we could pretty much figure it out because as by my recollection. So I will just say this: Pirelli normally publish a graphic, which I always use as our official reference for discussing pit stops. I just checked before the show, and they've not published it yet. So all my pit stop timings are based on what I could reconstruct after having been up from 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, they haven't been suiting you great. The issue with the safety car happening was it took away what should have been an interesting two-stop. So do you think that would have developed into an interesting two-stop? So that was the one stop. Without that safety car, then there would have been another round of pit stops at some point. And why is the undercut suddenly so much more powerful nearly at every race?
Well, at this race, and we discussed this in our little patron preview, I think, in this race, it's because they did this interesting thing where they sealed the surface of the track, which had developed some cracks after they did the bump. And the aggregate, what they put down, was both high degradation, but also kind of low grip. So it didn't take a lot of laps to get a very big tire offset. And you would see this, like, was it Perez? I forget, coming through. And his tires were like 3 or 4 laps younger, but it was a massive difference in the amount of grip they had, especially through the corners. So on the one hand, you had the early stoppers getting this advantage. So if I'm out for a lap or two, I'm actually taking huge chunks of time out of you. On the other hand, all you need is a couple of laps, and suddenly you have this big advantage when you catch me. So it was really setting up, especially with Ferrari, because Leclerc, as I had it, pitted around lap 22. He was on for a one-stop race, and that's about a 23, 24-second gain right there. And it would have been interesting because I don't know quite if he would have been in Red Bull's window. He might have been outside of Verstappen's, but he would have been much closer to Verstappen and well ahead of Perez. Perez would have had to catch him up and pass him again. And from Perez's comments, just the effort of getting around Leclerc burned his tires out, which is why he didn't really make any more forward progress from there.
So Perez again he's done that 2 races in a row. Yeah, everything's kind of good, but because I had to do more battling early on, I've used my tires up. And so that might be true, but that also feels like his new go-to of why he could only do second or third. And he would have been second if it wasn't for the safety car, probably.
I will put this here. No one has really pointed this out. I think the main reason he wound up second is because Alonso got ahead of him at the very, very start.
Third. He ended up third.
A third. Yeah. He would have been second. Sorry. He would have been second, except for Alonso got that amazing launch and got around the outside of him and detached him by 3, 4, 5, 6 seconds during the first stint. And he was never going to make that time up. His only chance, I think that did more damage than a lot of people realize, because he lost a significant amount of time behind Alonso. And then the knock-on effect of that at the pit stops was that he was trying to catch. And then at the safety car, that put him behind 2 other people who had been able to come in already and get back out on track. So when he came out, he suddenly had extra people to pass on his last set of tires. So there was nothing in it. There was no way for him to overcome the positional loss at the safety car stop. But if you go back to the beginning, the initial time loss to Verstappen, which meant that he wound up with that positional loss at the safety car, was due to Alonso detaching him right at the start of the race.
All right. So what we need to see to make that, if you want to do the experiment, is we want to see Perez a clear second off the line. So let's assume Verstappen's pole. He's second. Now they are just, line abreast, 2 seconds apart. Is there any world in which Perez is keeping up, or do we still think he's a long way off?
I don't know if he'd be. I think he keeps up a lot better. I think being in dirty air and in traffic was harder on the Red Bull in this race. And again, because I mentioned due to the peculiarities of this particular surface and the lack of knowledge about it, I think it was, I'm not sure he would have been able to keep up with Verstappen, but I don't think he would have lost 5 seconds in 2 laps, for example.
Yeah. And then one more thing is, I don't think their setups are the same. I'm not doing a conspiracy. I'm not saying, Verstappen's got a better car and gets all the best parts. I'm not saying that. But there's been a lot of noise out of Red Bull that Perez doesn't worry about what's going on Verstappen's side anymore. He does the best for him. But that could be a higher downforce package, couldn't it? You could have higher downforce than the car ahead of you. We see the Mercedes split that kind of thing all the time. And the thing that's getting me is, yes, overtaking someone does, to some extent, come down to getting a better exit than them. But Verstappen flies past people on the straight. It's inevitable. But when you see Perez behind someone, seems to get a good exit out of the corner, but then just in DRS doesn't have that same ability to fly by, you go, what's that down to?
Okay, well, I'm so glad you brought this up, because it lets me talk about tires a little bit.
Oh, good.
And the thing that I'm not sure if it got mentioned on the show was that overnight, over the Saturday night to the Sunday, if you were in China, over the Saturday to the Saturday night for me, they raised the front tire pressures by 1 PSI. Now, they were already insanely high. Pirelli did, yeah. They were already at 26, which is about the highest I think I've ever seen them to start out. And this is entirely down to the fact that nobody had any data on this surface. No one had any data on this track. So they were always going to be very conservative with their tire pressures. But that's going to mess up. I mean, think about it. Here you go, your sprint race, you make all your changes for qualifying, you're back in park for May. You wake up the next morning, now you have to add an extra pound per square inch of nitrogen pressure, because I'm pretty sure they use nitrogen, to your tires. That's going to significantly alter the characteristic and behavior of your front tire. And if you're someone like Perez, who likes a slightly understeery setup, it's because you're reducing the amount of flex in the sidewall and the amount of grip in the tire. As a result, you're going to wind up with slightly more understeer problems, and you're going to compensate for that. And we saw this with a lot of radio traffic of the drivers. They're all complaining about the rears going very rapidly on what is normally considered to be a front limited track. But because the fronts were essentially made less compliant, the rears were coming under more and more pressure. And so to answer your question, Red Bull's speed at the end of straight is entirely down to efficiency, which means you have to get either carry a lot of speed through the turn, more understeer, you're not going to do that, or you have to be able to make up for it with traction, being on the throttle smoother and earlier. And if you get wheel slip or wheel spin, you cost yourself a little half a kilometer an hour coming out between Max and Perez is going to be like several kilometers at the end of that long straight, which is why you would see Max untroubled, clean air, being able to take care of his tires exactly as he wanted to through every single pit stop, versus Perez stuck behind Alonso, burning his tires up, getting through traffic time after time. He's just losing that little bit extra on the rears, and as a result, having to work harder for each consecutive person that he catches. I mean, the margins are super tiny, and I'm delighted to see him being this much closer by doing the correct thing for his driving style instead of trying to learn somebody else's.
Yeah, I understood all of that. Yep.
Sorry.
I got it. I'll listen again. If you're listening in the podcast, you can just skip back and listen to it a few times, which I used to do it for Tech Time in the early days with you and Summers. I go, I'm just going to listen to that again. But I mean, I've given up now.
Is this going to be like the show, like my favorite shows? I put them on. I'm like, I'm going to watch all of this episode. Oh, look, it's 3:00 in the morning. Time to go to bed.
Do you know what? I fall asleep to science podcasts. That's what I do. So I get and history, science and history. So I get all this great information, but then I fall asleep and I have to scroll to find it the next day. And do you know what, Matt? Loads of people have said, don't take this the wrong way, but your podcasts send me to sleep. So,
no, I think it's a compliment. It's because that means you're in that. Yeah. You're in that space you want to be in as a podcast where the listener feels like they're just there and part of it.
So hello to everybody listening in bed. It's time to fall asleep now because I think Matt's going to talk about tires again for the next 5 minutes. So there you go. So is there more tactics in our strategy corner? What else did you pick up on?
Well, I think the other interesting thing to talk about, because as I mentioned, the outside stop, the outside limit for the tires was around where the safety car is. So we had this interesting undercut, standard strategy, one stop battle brewing at different ends of the field. And then with the safety car, the reason it really got less exciting, except for, when back markers with 10-second penalties were fighting each other because they had nothing else to lose at that point, is because everyone had to go to the hard tire, which was just capable of getting to the end of the race. So at that point, it became, we have to keep this tire alive to the end of the race. And if we don't do this now, we can't make up the loss. So it converted all the interesting strategy to essentially it was the back half of a one-stop strategy after the safety car. And that's just unfortunate timing, I think. Unfortunate timing. And weirdly, you would think it would have been the Stroll thing that brought out the second safety car, but it was actually just like that tap by Magnussen on Tsunoda.
Mugging.
Just ruined everything. But the interesting thing to me was that both Haas and Alpine brought some fairly big upgrades pretty early in the season. And we saw, I think it was, I think you'd have to say at least mixed success for both of them. Now, I know I didn't want to say this, but I know that not both Alpine drivers had the new chassis.
Oh, okay. Did Gasly get a massive advantage, did he?
No, actually, Ocon got the new chassis, which surprised me. I thought for sure they would have given it to Gasly.
I don't know the politics between those two. That might be something to explore. So look, we're going to pop on Sunday for a normal news show. I want to bring this to an end so that we can have more time to speak with Mike Caulfield. But any points left over, we can bring that to Sunday, and we can have an upgrades corner, because now is very much upgradey season, isn't it? We're getting into that. Major upgrades for Miami. Mercedes have identified an upgrade, so we can all just assume that will work. Yeah, let's hope that will work. They'll probably be fighting Verstappen now every race.
I mean, you know, they could go well in low speed. Now they can go well in high speed, but they got to be able to do both. So who knows? Maybe the new upgrade will help them with it some. But
I'm still upset. I'm still getting over Hamilton finishing P2 and then going, let's make massive worse changes. And go, does anybody at Mercedes, are they thinking, hey, you know that meme where someone suggests something and then they get thrown out the window? That meme. Yeah. They go, someone's there at Mercedes suggesting, why don't we not make massive changes between Saturday and the race, and then he just gets thrown out the window.
It kind of puts into perspective like the year that Vettel lost to Ricciardo though at Red Bull. It's just like, oh, you know, it's like the team is gradually oh sure, Lewis, you want to make those changes, you know what,
go for it.
Yeah, we might as well. I mean, the engineers are looking at each other like, well, I'm sure we'll learn something, but yeah, you know, why not change a successful P2 car in between Saturday finishing B2, and I'm not sure why they did that. But even then, you make those changes and they change the tire pressures, and it could all be messed up anyway just due to that.
Definitely better, because it's another sprint weekend in Miami as well. So we'll do a bit of a Miami preview maybe on Sunday too. If you want to do mailbag questions, we can. So mailbag is open, feedback@missedapex.net, and just do the subject line mailbag, and it can be a comment, it can be a question, it can be praise, or it can be damning criticism of the show, which we'll file in the bin. But do send us your feedback and get involved. And remember that you can hang out with us in Miami by going to missedapexpodcast.com/Miami, and we'll do a sprint race review, and we'll do a non-time sensitive show as well. And we'll then sit back with a cocktail and watch a Senna versus Prost classic F1 race. Sounds all right, doesn't it? The cocktail bit.
Definitely the cocktail bit.
And I'm just looking forward to it not being cloudy and rainy, because that's what it's been for 14 months on top of my head here in Essex, England. All right, let's go and speak to Mike Caulfield about the drama around 2016. Hello, everybody. We have travelled forward in time one day. I'm wearing a fancy hoodie. It's available at missedapexpodcast.com/merch. But we're going back in time 8 years, back to 2016, where the memory is still fresh of what I think is one of the great F1 inter-team battle rivalries of F1 history. So here to talk to us a little bit more about that is someone who was there at the time. It's ex-Mercedes strategist Mike Caulfield. Hello, Mike.
Yeah, good to be on. It's going to be weird talking about this again, but it's.
Did you walk away from Mercedes and go, I'm never thinking about Rosberg versus Hamilton ever again?
I mean, yeah, it was something which, I left at the end of 16, so right at the end of there. So, and it was quite I think a lot of people who were there at the time will say the same. It was a pretty stressful season. So having a break from that was quite nice.
Which is odd, because it was such a dominant car. Red Bull and Ferrari really weren't seen as rivals at that time. But if you look at Red Bull now, they're in that position. They aren't stressed. But you guys, whew.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the slight difference there, isn't there, in the actual competitiveness for that number one spot, and probably the team dynamics as well. I mean, I'm not going to assume what Red Bull are doing, but I think it's pretty clear that there's a definite number one driver, whereas at the time at Mercedes, there was no number one driver. It was a team, and it was whoever would be leading, wouldn't it? And it was everything as well. I think we'll get onto it. They were trying to be fair and equitable as long as possible until it was mathematically impossible for one or the other couldn't win it.
There was quite a bit of inventing from the team wall, and this is probably from, some of this would have come through the strategy team, where when one was ahead of the other and there was a potential battle coming up, you'd hear over the radio, oh, guys, you're not going to believe this, but the curbs are really damaging the tyres, and we need to turn the engines down a little bit, actually. So if you could just go ahead and, just let's bring it home, and you get all those kind of messages.
Yeah, I mean, that was a point, obviously, where we're still 3 years, only in the third year of the new engine rules. You could still run multiple engine modes throughout a race, whereas obviously now you have to run the same engine mode as in quali. There's no change in that anymore. And for part of it as well was, well, we were only competing against ourselves. We give the same. So if one car had to turn the engine down, the other car also had to turn it down. They always had to be on the same engine mode at the same time.
Why?
Because that was part of the agreement. It was like unless everything was basically around the team and it was about maximizing team points. So the first thing is, right, we have to finish as a 1-2. It didn't matter which order it was, but it was a 1-2. If one, say for example, car number one, first place is 50 seconds up the road and car two is fighting third place, then that would be a chance for them to split the kind of the engine modes. But if they're fighting in between each other, which was the case the majority of the time, it was the same engine mode. And partly, well, was it, as we saw kind of throughout the season, there was still that risk of reliability issues. There was still issues which potentially come back. So any chance of trying to protect the mileage in the engines was obviously taken at that point.
So 2016, just for a bit of context, for anyone who wasn't watching at the time, how dare you be new and not quite have been watching as long as I have. But they had basically great friends, Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton, joined the same team in 2013. It seemed to me like Lewis Hamilton was getting a little bit of favoritism. I'm sure Mike can correct me in a second. When he was told to hold position for a podium in Malaysia, I think, and it was all very awkward. Then 2014, they're battling. It's very, very close. 2015, really not competitive at all. Rosberg having the advantage on a Saturday and Hamilton having a clear race pace advantage. And then 2016, suddenly it's game on again. Hamilton has about 5 races with significant failures. Rosberg not without problems either, but the big engine blowout in Malaysia left Lewis Hamilton needing more than just finishing first to Rosberg second in the final 4 races, and it didn't happen. So by the time we got to 2016, Mike, has that friendship already gone between Lewis and Nico?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's safe to say by the beginning of 16, it was strained at best at that point. And I think it was, I mean, when they first started in 13, 14, they were still, I think, very, very amicable from what I saw. I mean, I wasn't on a car specific and I was still factory based at that point, so I didn't see the full like dynamics of it at the track. But at that point as well, the car crews were all pretty friendly. The engineering crews were all kind of collaborative. We were obviously at that point where we still hadn't won a championship till the end of 14, so the still main thing was Mercedes had to win the championship. And there was bigger political reasons behind that as well, behind the drivers. So 14, 15, where they had to win the title, they had to win the championship constructors, and they had to win a certain amount of races. And there was a lot of things in the kind of kind of criteria that they had to do. But I think basically, as obviously Nico, I mean, he's one of probably the cleverest drivers out there in terms of actual like smarts. I mean, he went to do a aerodynamics degree, I believe, and in London before he became a racing driver. I think he didn't complete it, but he's very clever, and he's very clever in that sense. But I kind of get the impression he felt that this was his obviously only chance he was ever going to get to win a world championship, and obviously to beat him, he has to beat his teammate. So I think by 16 he started having to really nail down, and I think it caught Lewis a little bit by surprise. I think going into 16, I think so. I think. I don't think there was really. I know in 14, Nico had a chance of winning the title in Abu Dhabi, but that's only because of the double points fiasco. Which, if it wasn't double points, he wouldn't have had a chance. And 15, I mean, I can't remember, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think 15 was ended by
quite
October
early.
Or something, quite early. So in really both those seasons, Lewis had the edge on him. And so I think 16 kind of was a little bit of a shock to the system for Lewis. And then obviously, as you mentioned, the first few races, it went against Lewis, and suddenly he's on the back foot with the momentums with Nico at that point.
Yeah. So those first 4 races are really interesting. I mean, Rosberg won all 4, I think, and there was some reliability issues. I have actually got a list here. It's just for the lack of scrolling, Of course, as a Hamilton fan, I'm here with the list of excuses. But there you go. China, ERS failure. In fact, you could say the total reliability for Hamilton that season. I've got it in front of me. ERS failure in China. ERS failure again in Sochi. And moving him to 10th on the grid. Engine mode issue during the European Grand Prix. Would be Baku?
That was Baku.
Yeah. Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
That's not, and that wasn't an engine mode issue. So this was like, I think in this one, I'm correct. This was when it was the radio communications ban.
Oh my God, that was so funny. They weren't allowed to give advice.
They weren't allowed to tell him what to change it to. So he'd put himself in the wrong mode, and then we weren't allowed to tell him what mode to put it back into. So I wouldn't say it was an engine mode problem. It was a driver problem in that sense. And then again, so actually that's a failure of Lewis.
Fair enough. Fair enough. That was just to remind people. The rule was you couldn't. There was no coaching, wasn't there?
Oh, was that? Well, you couldn't tell him anything. Couldn't literally tell him. It was awful. It was really like I remember the first few races that season. It was just like you were sat in the room, kind of going, "Well, what do we really do?" Because we're not allowed to tell them like target lap times. We're not allowed. You're only allowed to tell them to box. We weren't even like to tell them how many laps it was to the box in terms of strategy and stuff. So it was just. Yeah, I've never heard the radio kind of so quiet during a race because you're just like. I don't really know what to say or what we're allowed to say.
So Rosberg had sort of gone into the wrong mode as well, but when he had an issue, he just went back, I think, to where he was, and that was it sorted.
I can't remember exactly what it was at that point, but he was able to be in the right mode, and Lewis just flicking switches left, right, and center.
And that's what he said. He goes, "Well, I'm going to just start pressing everything then." And then we go, Lewis, no, please don't do that. That would be a disaster. Sorry, Matt.
Well, no, that was the exact question. I had a similar memory of somehow Rosberg had started out in the mode he was supposed to be in. So he was able to just go back to that. But for some reason, Lewis wasn't. So it was, I don't know, it was the dial plus 2 buttons number of combinations that he would have had to try to find the correct one. So it was never, it wasn't a fair fight in terms of, he could just go back to he could turn a switch back 1 to where he was 100%. And it would be fine.
100%. It wasn't like he was one out on a lateral switch. Yeah, these are the kind of the settings on the steering wheels where you had to enter a menu, select this menu, and go into this. Yeah, it was not an easy just a switch I can look down and like, this one I can see is in the wrong spot. Yeah, it was. I can't remember what exactly. I think it was obviously to do with the engine harvesting at that point. So, but yeah, it's.
How long did that rule last?
I think it left they stopped it middle of that season, I think. Because Nico got a penalty for it in Silverstone because we told him some information and got, I think, a penalty after that. And I think it got to the summer break, and I think post summer break it wasn't in play anymore.
Yeah, so I'm halfway through my list of excuses. Look, the big one was the engine blowout in Malaysia, and it was just such a weird dynamic with the points there because they were only finishing first and second. They only really had an opportunity to catch 7 or 14 point swing at a time every race. So that engine blowout in Malaysia really cost him almost the equivalent of 4 Grand Prix, 4 opportunities to chase down Rosberg, and it just a massive blow for the team, for him, for his side.
Well, no, and for the team itself as well, because you've got to remember at that point as well, we were there was a lot of accusations coming towards the team, but there was favoritism one of the other after the beginning of the season. And
sorry about that.
But it just isn't like, apart from the actual kind of car crews themselves and the engineers on the side of the garage, who obviously have a slight driver split and they want their driver to win. Obviously, the team itself is the criteria, but for everyone in the design office, it's just the team. For everyone's bonus, it's just the team. So, like, I think one way to put it was what we were kind of saying is that the engine blew up, and the person who, I can't remember what was defined was responsible for the blow up, but obviously the person who's either manufactured it or designed it or whatever is absolutely feeling awful because effectively he's killed the championship. He's not. That name isn't known to the company. That name isn't known to the public. But for him himself, he knows. He's like, crap, is that me? And so there's that kind of pressure on the. And this is where what I was talking about earlier about that kind of stress and pressure that you didn't want to do something which was going to influence the championship fight one way or the other when you were a team. So it's the same as like the strategist where we tried to come up with kind of the rules of engagement to make it fair and equitable, because we didn't want to put the position that we suddenly inadvertently favored one car over the other and destroyed the chances of one of the drivers.
This is actually something I've been really interested in, because you had this battle ongoing from when Lewis joined the team. And one of my favorite memories, I'm just going to interject, is I believe it was at Barcelona, where the teams, each side of the garage was spying on the other side of the garage's energy usage, and they were trying to reprogram the deployment of the ERS to win the race. It was incredibly exciting. And then the very next race, there was a rule that you couldn't do that any longer. So you have a multi-year evolved set of rules to try and keep things fair.
Yeah.
But this was so close between the two of them. Did it start to get to the point where you were afraid you couldn't manage either side of the garage because of how intense this battle was?
No, and I think this is. I mean, it was difficult because there was definitely characters on both sides of the garage who were kind of wanting to favor their team. So, for example, you talk about the engine mode thing, and like we always had the discussion. It was always like both on an unwritten rule that they'd be in the same engine mode, and then like I can't remember exactly the race. It might have been one when you were saying Barcelona. It might have been, I think it was potentially it was Bahrain or something as well. But you notice that suddenly Lewis is in this engine mode that he shouldn't be in, and he's like in a higher powered engine mode. And then you suddenly go back. It's like, how long's he been in that for? And like, there's been no kind of communication for him to go into this one. So it's like, first one, has he gone into it himself because he obviously knows what he's doing, or is there? And then you kind of figure it out. Is potentially his controls engineer. Has he kind of gone into like? Have they got like a special code kind of thing? Is going into it? So anyway, that was kind of so you started getting little things like that, and then you started getting people. I mean, you got I'm not going to name names because I don't want to kind of like say how devious some people were, but yeah, there was potentially, but there were instances where Nico's setup of the car was much better than Lewis's, and suddenly going into qualifying, the settings have suddenly been totally wiped out of Lewis's spreadsheet and just copy and pasted from Nico's into there, and then he's just using Nico's direct setup into it, going and
that's an amazing thing to go, right, well, that's a thing that happened. And we should say allegedly, I suppose. No, probably not. But but then we hear things like, they'll look at each other's traces to just basically copy each other's driving as well.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a standard driver thing to do. But both of them had they have different driving styles though, so that didn't kind of always work in that respect. But you'd be trying to look at where he's gaining time on me, and I think it was noticeable that, especially that year, that Nico was better setting up the car than Lewis was. So you go through Friday practice, you go through Saturday practice, and going into qualifying, very rarely you'd probably find that like Nico was probably ahead in most of those practice, and Lewis is behind, and suddenly he's just like. He's getting a bit stressed and a bit kind of there. It's like, what am I doing? What am I doing? And I'm like, right, I'm just taking this setup. I'm just going through it. But then same things in like, you'd get to find that all the debriefs. So all the debriefs in F1 teams, you generally come straight after a session, sit down table, one side of the tables and one side, the other side. And you'll go through like a runner, like, can you explain, like, talk about how the car is and stuff. And it got to a point in 2016 where you'd find they were literally just giving one word answers because they didn't want to give anything away about how the car was to the other driver. So you're starting to get little things like that where it was just, like, it wasn't to like the benefit of the team. And you got to give credit to Shove, who was the chief race engineering director, and obviously he's still there now. And he really just pulled it in line. He was like, fine, right, I'm experiencing this. I'm seeing both your things, and I will give the information to both sides of the car, and I will manage this. And he did a really good job at managing it in the end. It got to a point where, yeah, people were trying to play games, but it never actually really came to anything really, and it was quickly kind of sorted out.
Well, that kind of anticipated my next question. When it came, did you have rules already in place about, was there data that they could keep to themselves each side of the garage, or was it always because the team was most important?
It was
all data was up for grabs if the other side asked for it.
Yeah, all data was fully open. It was totally team first. The whole thing about it was the team winning. Everyone's bonus was based on the team winning, the constructors, not on the drivers' championship. It was, like I said earlier, like there was other kind of deals which were in place with FOM, but they got extra additional kind of prize money and stuff if we got X amount of wins, blah blah blah. So obviously it was a 1-2, but there was still most of the time, but there was still threats from kind of Red Bull and Ferrari at the point where if we start into like blowing up internally, then they will come up and win races. So,
yeah, well, as we saw in one particular race, which will come up soon because we've got a few listener questions here. I'm going to start with this one from Mark Greenow, who asks, "How bad did the rivalry get inside the team? Did the engineers and mechanics fall out?" So we have to ask you, I want an honest question. What was your role at the time, and what team were you on? Team Lewis, and I'm hovering over the hang up button here if it's the wrong answer.
Oh no, so I'm just your race strategy engineer. So we're totally sat in neutral land where we do both cars. The way we worked as a team then is that you had obviously James Valls was the chief strategist, and then there was three of us basically part of the group who worked on a weekend, and it was kind of one per car, and one would do competitive stuff, but would rotate around week on week. We were really in the same car, so we were very much a case of we'd we were just very, very neutral in that sense. And again, we're looking for the best one. We created the rules of engagement, which was like the kind of strategy rules, which trying to like define of what we can and can't do a strategy. So in that sense, it's a bit of a boring answer in the sense of we were very, very neutral in that respect.
Also, could be a lie. I'm trying to suss this out. Could be a lie, but you'd have to think about things like if the person at the front gets priority for the pit stops, but there are times where you genuinely you need to protect from the person in third to like do an undercut, and that might advantage that person, and then you've got to deal with the politics of why on earth did I get that tactic.
Well, exactly, that was it. So like it was the case, and again, most often than not, because we were 20 seconds up the road or whatever, it was the case of yeah, I mean, if we just do the optimum strategy, both cars, which would be the same strategy, it's fine. The second car was allowed to do an offset strategy, but only if it was a not an optimum strategy as such. For example,
like not a winning strategy to beat.
Well, no, we said, but basically we tried to cover our backs. So, say for example, it was a definite one stop. We would give the second car an opportunity to do a second stop. First one, if he didn't lose any positions for it or put him under threat to losing any position, so the 1-2 was still guaranteed. And second one, it was like on all the numbers slower. But if he wants to try it and give himself in position to try and make that overtake end of the race, then that was possible to do. But it had to meet certain criteria if that was allowed. A lot of the time, if it was close between a 1 and a 2, and like we weren't sure between two strategies, both cars would be on the same strategy. And then I guess answering just the other bit of the question in terms of kind of crews and engineering, I think I touched on the previous one, but yeah, there was definitely rivalries building up on that. I think the interesting one as well with the car crews was at the beginning of the season, Lewis's car crew went onto Nico's car for the beginning of that year and vice versa.
How much difference does that make?
Well, I think it does make a difference because the drivers do build up with relationships with the crews. So, I mean, you've got literally one guy like fiddling around your crotch area to try and do your seatbelts up. So you get very kind of personal with a lot of these guys, and like you do your seat fits and all that aspect of it. And so then suddenly and it wasn't just a case of 1 or 2, but they literally picked up one. They just switched sides of the garage just to try. So I think Lewis coming into that season, it was that another aspect. He was a little bit unhappy with why that was the case. And then I think Nico, I don't know the reason behind it fully. I don't know if it was a request or if it was just a case of, look, we're just going to try and keep this even. We don't actually think there's a difference between the crews. They're both very good crews, and we're trying to prove this to you. But the drivers are like, say, look, it doesn't matter who you have. You're still going to get a decent set of guys working on your car.
Well, that was kind of where I was going with the question is that, was this pre-planned? Did you know going into the season this was going to happen, or did it only happen after the season, like after you got to testing, say, suddenly they said, oh, we're going to do this?
No. So this was done first thing, beginning straight after 15. So like January, February time comes. So before we got to testing, that was all decided and switched. It wasn't like a suddenly Lewis rocks up and he's seen a lot of other people around his car. It was that was all kind of pre-planned in that aspect. I don't know when the discussion, the actual conversation happens for it. I don't know if it was pre-planned from like mid 2015 or if it was 2015 finished and it was a chat which happened then. I can't remember the full details of how it played out in that respect.
It feels like he was unsettled. There was obviously the reliability issues, but despite he was definitely like the better of the two, out and out. Well, overall, you'd probably say, but Rosberg was close enough that if the right circumstances came around, he was close enough to take advantage of anything that's coming along. I'm interested by he was better at the setups that season. What makes someone better at setups?
It's in like, so again, this is kind of your relationship with the crew. And I think a lot of it came down to it's not the crew, sorry, the engineers in a sense, but a lot of it came down to the work Nico put in. And I mean, I think he said it himself once he retired at 16, he pushed himself hard. And like, you got to give him credit to the sense of how hard he pushed himself, because he knew he had to just be literally on it the whole season to beat Lewis, because he wasn't going to beat him otherwise. So he did more sim days. He was meeting with his engineers more. There was a lot more conversations going on. Like, I've never seen a driver in the factory as much, to my point in that career, as I saw Nico that year. Lewis had a thing where he couldn't drive the sim, so he did very little sim driving.
Why couldn't he?
He just didn't like it. Didn't think it gave him any benefit. He didn't think it was good enough. He was not a fan of it. He didn't think it gave him anything in that sense, and that's fair. And some people like that, and I think he's a little bit that. Whereas even if Nico had those thoughts, he persevered. So he because ultimately some of the things you test in the sim, while it might not be beneficial to drivers, it's beneficial to the engineers to try and get some information in kind of in the long run. So the work Nico put in, I think he just spent hours and hours and hours with his engineers, and like he just went into the weekend potentially more prepared. His feedback was always very good. Like I said at the beginning, he was a very clever bloke. So the changes he made potentially over the course of a Friday were just a little bit more scientific and engineering wise than maybe what Lewis was trying to do, because Lewis is probably fantastic in terms of his in his kind of feel of the car. He will sometimes want as articulate, whereas like, this car feels bad. That's not really useful to an engineer, whereas a Nico could come in and give you that little bit of information of like what feels bad and what should we do with it, and make suggestions himself as well.
Whereas, now he just tears the setup up and starts again after every Friday, which is a bit, frustrating, I guess. So, it's interesting to know how much of that was driver-led and how much of it is engineer-led with the setups. Because that was my theory, wasn't it, Matt? That this setup stuff is coming from Hamilton at the moment, that he's the one driving no, it's not good enough. P2 wasn't good enough. Tear it up, start again.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I'm curious about this. My understanding is one of the biggest and most important jobs of the performance engineer and the race engineer is to translate what the driver says into concrete setup changes or suggestions to improve lap time. So in essence, the better your engineer understands you and what you're saying, then the better they can help you set up the car. So this switch then was actually potentially a huge thing based on what you're saying about how Hamilton tended to drop his feedback more in field terms than in precise engineering terms.
The engineers didn't change on the cars, though. They stayed in the same team. So Bono, for example, was part of it, and it was still part of his team on that one. I think the more the case of this, which I like, maybe I don't play, so like, it's because it was such a tight battle. They were already like, we're already 1 and 2 with very good lap times, and they're still pushing for more and more and more. And I think it was just kind of this trying to bring it out that little bit more like performance. Right? And as you touch on it, if you actually look over the course of the season, you take away the kind of mechanical issues that Lewis had, then he wins the championship fairly comfortably.
I think so.
So I think it's like, and so this is shows that like Nico just needs to make sure that he's on it, and any chance he can get on it and get points, he gets the points, because he knows that like sometimes he'll get lucky, sometimes, and potentially he'll get unlucky at times as well. So it was a little bit down to that, I think, and I think Lewis, while I was saying he struggled with setup or they weren't quite good, again, once, I mean, so especially the second half of the season, once he got into qualifying in the race, he was often the quicker driver again. It was again, just some of the early season form, which cost him.
Well, if he's mysteriously finding setups somehow overnight in the garage, then that might explain it. But no. I've got no doubt that he was, would have won 2016 without the reliability. But I don't think every driver would have been able to pick up the pieces like Rosberg was able to do. So, he's made his own luck there.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's it. That's why I don't want to downplay what Nico did, because I saw the amount of work he went into it, and like he 100% knew he needed to be on it every weekend. If he was slightly off, then he wouldn't have a chance, and he'd be half second off Lewis, and he'd be 15 seconds down the road in the race, kind of, for example. And a bit maybe like what we're seeing at the moment with Red Bull, but you've got a second car which doesn't compete with your first car.
Also, I think it probably helped Rosberg that the pack was there was a gap to the pack. So like, whereas Perez in the last few races, he just being that little bit, off, and then he's having to start stints behind cars, getting caught in the way. If that happened to Bottas a little bit as well, because the pack was a little bit closer and you had the Ferraris in there. I've got a question from Ian, and this is the big one really. It's about Spain. Barcelona 2016. I would love to know how the team personnel reacted to the collision at Barcelona. Tensions had been building for years by then. They'd had a few run-ins in prior seasons. Yeah, Spa 2014 was the first time I met my wife's grandparents. I said, we'll sit down and we'll watch the race. And of course, Rosberg stuck his nose up and gave Lewis a puncher. And I was like, yeah, I won't repeat what I said, but it was a shock to their grandparents. Is this who you're marrying? Right. But this felt like the inevitable cataclysmic moment. Did it create friction among team personnel? Did people assign fault for that and just get on with things? What was the atmosphere in the garage like after it happened? Because the messier the details, the better, says Ian. But yeah, this is the big one, Mike. It's a historic moment in F1.
It is. It was a huge one. I mean, it was a case of, obviously we were going on to win potentially every race of the season that year, and then taking both cars out of the turn 4 of Barcelona, which wasn't part of the plan. I'm gonna be unfortunately really boring in the sense of actually, but there was a bit of obviously a debrief afterwards. You go into the kind of whole kind of, right, what happened, why did it happen, assign a fault if there is any fault. I mean, I was back at the factory for the race, and obviously it was over pretty quickly in that respect. But then we had in-season testing at Barcelona the week after, so I was flying out. So I flew out Sunday night, and you got to track Monday. I mean, and it was just business as usual. Basically, there was no kind of like chat about it. I mean, I'd obviously missed the actual at-track action on the post-race afterwards, and I did have experience of Austria that year of the post-track action where I potentially think maybe Barcelona was a little bit the same, but yeah.
So the two incidents were, Barcelona was Nico Rosberg selected the wrong engine mode coming into turn 3 or off the line,
and he was off the line. So at the starter, it was in the wrong engine mode. Yeah, so it basically meant it drained his battery more than it should have done, which meant he derated going into turn 4.
And basically on a straight, chopped across. Oh, that's my reading of it. Chopped across, pushed Lewis Hamilton off track. Hamilton kept his foot in, absolutely dog stubborn. But I think Rosberg's fault. Yeah, but Hamilton, he was like, well, okay, if you're gonna do that, then we're having this accident. Basically, that's what it felt like. Oh yeah, fine. You're not centering me. And I think he kept his foot in once he knew he was crashing as well. Just my personal opinion. I think, right, if I'm off, you're off. That's how I read it, and I wonder how the Mercedes team read it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking back at it at the time, and it's like, I think it was a case of Nico's move was potentially a bit borderline. I'm trying to relay it as how it was explained to the team at the time. And yeah, I don't think anyone put any fault at Lewis's door in that one, but yeah, I think that the words avoidable were used.
He did absolutely nothing to avoid it.
Yeah, so and I think it was the kind of, again, the kind of retribution to it is like, well, you've both taken each other out, so neither of you are any better off here. Actually, Lewis is worse off because obviously his first few races of the year, he's already lost points, and then as a team, we'd lost our chance of doing a full season, winning every race. So it was, I think there was a bit of obviously discussion about that. I think post that, obviously, we then had to look at, again, the rules of engagement, make sure. I mean, these rules of engagement, by the way, were first written up on that Spa incident you mentioned.
Right.
So they were kind
in
of
2014.
Like, 2014 yeah. was that kind of, and the amount, I remember, I totally forgotten about that until you just mentioned it. The amount of analysis I had to do post that event of whose fault it was and not fault it was, and what was allowed and what would happen in the future if this situation, and who was.
Well, what did you conclude?
I can't remember.
Oh, okay. Because obviously,
I honestly can't remember.
I'm bog-eyed and biased on that one, but Rosberg. It's worth looking up. So Spa 2014, Rosberg Hamilton. It's one of those things where, he definitely stuck his nose in Rosberg. Hamilton's. The argument is always, well, there is a bit of a car there. So again, you cannot drive into the place where a car exists. So a difficult one to pick apart. But come on, you've had enough time now to think. Who did you blame it on at the time?
I mean, I think at the time it was a case of, I think it was Nico's fault at that point. But I mean, he was never going to make an overtaking. He didn't have to stick his nose.
Yeah. It's okay. Kind of. Well, we've got you. What we're doing, whose fault is it? My goodness. Yeah. What year was the Austrian Grand Prix one that you mentioned? Where Rosberg was 16
as well.
There's that 16, where Rosberg basically just didn't turn at the end of turn 4 or whatever it was and just ran Lewis off. He is self-policing in the end because he ended up damaging himself more, didn't he? Oh, yeah, his wing fell off.
He lost his front wing and then got a penalty for it at the same time.
Right.
I mean, that one was bad in a number of senses. Of that race was actually, I think that was potentially like one of the and it's not really reported on, but that was actually one of the worst races of the year from a lot of kind of point of view.
Tension-wise,
yeah. So because it was a case where drivers had then started to, Nico. So if I remember rightly, Lewis was leading. I think the plan was that both drivers were on a 2-stop race. And then, what would happen there? It was a case of that Lewis was leading. He'd got priority. He made his first pit stop. Nico then decided he was he made his first pit stop. Lewis made his second pit stop, again, as he was. Then Nico decided he was going to try and make a 1-stop work. And even though we'd called him into box, refused to box, basically. So then it was a case of Lewis going, what the hell's happening here? Why is this happening? And that's why we got the catch at the end where Lewis caught Nico because he was on the faster strategy. But then had to try and overtake him. And Nico was in that situation where, right, I'm going to try and block him and box him off. So, yeah, there was definitely tensions there. And then after the race, there was, I won't go into details. Kind of, there was a head teacher's telling off by Toto in the engineering office. Really,
Stuart asked how many headphones did Toto Wolff go through that year.
Well, he was on the pit wall at that point, so he wasn't allowed to break any.
So I know you aren't always away and directly dealing with the drivers, but I'm going to ask, like in the popular imagining of 2016, the Barcelona crash is maybe the point where the tension between Rosberg and Hamilton takes them from friends to former friends who are now competing for the most important thing in the world. But as you tell it, I begin to wonder, was Austria maybe the moment that Hamilton realized how far Nico was ready to go to win this thing?
I think so, yeah. I think that was definitely a turnaround in that respect. I think that was, Austria for me anyway. And it's one of those ones that obviously I wasn't at the track a lot. I was at the factory, so I may be hidden a bit, and I was at the track at Austria, so I saw it kind of firsthand. But obviously with what happened in terms of strategy and stuff, and it kind of, again, we went through this, it was quite defined to the drivers what the expectation was in everything, and Nico basically went against a team order, and it was well, not a team order in that sense, but like that wasn't the planned strategy, and then suddenly he's just changed the strategy on the fly, and so put ourselves in a position where potentially both cars are going to take each other out again, which is one of the rules which we said cannot happen. We cannot risk ourselves losing the Constructors' Championship, which was never really a risk. But at that point, you just don't know what's going to happen. You didn't know that Red Bull weren't going to suddenly come back and be fantastic the second half of the season in that respect.
Yeah, and you just look stupid as well. You want to avoid reputational damage.
Well, I think that was part of the dressing down post Austria race by Toto. He did say we looked like a whole load of stupid people.
Yeah, he's very restrained in his language, actually, Toto.
He was very restrained, yes, yeah.
He's just thinking about future podcast recording. Okay, so Stuart had another question there, actually, which was basically that. How often would the drivers override the strategy calls, believing, if they were believing that the other driver was being helped, more by the strategy?
I mean, thinking back on it, there was basically that race in Austria, which Nico changed it. Other than that, I can't really remember a prime example where they went against it. We tried to, like I said, if there was an opportunity, we would try to give the driver an offset strategy where it was possible. And then the only other one was obviously, and Lewis was potentially entitled to do this, was Abu Dhabi, where Lewis drove slow to try and push Nico back into traffic because Lewis needed to win and Nico needed to be. I can't remember exactly where Nico.
No, it was. Yeah, so Lewis needed one car. So he needed Vettel to overtake Rosberg and finish in between them. And you had Paddy Lowe on the radio, I think, desperately trying to go, hey, we need you to speed up. And Lewis going, I suggest you leave me to it. That was the radio call at the time.
Yes, and but what Lewis didn't realise at the time, but he was actually almost giving Massa the race win in the Williams by doing what he was doing. Because Massa, so obviously we made a pit stop. Lewis is trying to push back, and Massa's then just going ahead and going into a one stop. So he was actually building this gap where he was actually potentially opening up a pit stop window at this point. So that was the kind of concern from our side of things, that like he was actually throwing away his own race win there. And in the end, it was fine. It might have been Bottas. I can't remember. It was one of the Williams anyway. But yeah, it was. Obviously he was trying to. He knew the only way he could win the championship was for Lewis for Nico not to be second or whatever it was. So yeah, he was trying to do what it was. So again, that was slightly against what the plan was, but you can't understand why he did it.
Loving F1 fans and the way their opinions flip-flop. I can't find anyone who both thinks it was okay what Lewis did backing up and that it was okay what Perez did in 2021 backing up. Most people think one was perfectly fine and one was basically as bad as murder.
Yeah, I mean, there's F1 fans in it.
No, exactly. No, I'm guilty of the same. Checo's one was bang out of order. 2016 was fine. Gone back.
I will just throw in there that in 2016, they were direct competitors. So he was backing his direct competitor up, whereas Perez was an indirect competitor and was interfering with the race. So you could I can see a tiny sliver of they're not quite apples and apples there.
There you go. So I'm right, is basically what you're saying. That's good. And then I guess finally, the retirement. I did have a question around that, but here we go. So this is Ryan Hassan says, it seemed that Lewis found another level in his all-round performance as an F1 driver after Nico left. Is this the impression from inside Mercedes as well? And if so, what would the cause of that be? Obviously a shock retirement from Rosberg, or was it?
Yeah, I mean, 100% it was a shock retirement. I mean, I'd literally, because obviously I was leaving the team at the end of 16 to go to Haas. So I think I'd just started. I'd already actually left. I'd started my massively long 2-week garden leave period in December before Nico had handed in his notice. So I wasn't actually in the team at that point. Like when he had retired, I was already on tending to my garden at that point. But yeah, I think going into that next season, I'm obviously quite friends with quite a few of the guys at Merck still, and I still chat to them. And I think one of the guys summed it up and just said, it felt the atmosphere was so much better in the team that following season. It was just the tension wasn't there. The atmosphere was just better, and I think that allowed Lewis to up his performance because he wasn't having to stress about the outside things, which I mean, in the grand scheme of things, you've got to give credit for Nico putting him under that pressure, which allowed him not to perform potentially at his peak, and I think that's what Nico knew he had to do. But Nico also knew that he couldn't continue that for another season. He was done. He was like he'd won the championship. I think he was pretty certain he couldn't keep to the same level he was doing that previous season, and he wasn't going to win it again. So he retired. But yeah.
To win it again, you'd need to that level of effort and hope that you get the same circumstances as well. Like it already paid off, didn't it? So
exactly. Yeah. So that was it. And chatting to the engineers there, I think it was a much better bond between the groups once Valtteri came in. And it was just overall, it was just a nicer place to be post 16. Which I like, and I mean, I left. Sorry, I left, and I wasn't involved in the day at the track the most of the time. But you could feel that tension building, and you were just petrified of doing something or kind of favoring one over the other inadvertently, not like deliberately, but just doing some of that. And the amount of times as well, we just had to kind of delve into what did he do here, why did he do it, and just it was just, and so it took actually your eyes off the day job as well. But like, I want to do this, but you're having to spend a lot of time kind of policing things and trying to get on top of, right, he's made this move, right? Does that go against the rules, or like what we've said? Are they kind of against going what? And it was
so it's a sport. It
was just painful, basically.
A sport within a sport.
Well, I want to ask, because now you've intrigued me. We argue sometimes about whether it's better to have two equal drivers or a clear number one driver in a team. So, I mean, there's the team argument where you think you'd want like a Sainz Leclerc kind of setup where the drivers are pretty, very, very close to each other, and potentially any given weekend, either driver could win. But then your tale of this makes me think maybe the opposite is really better. What's your opinion here?
I think, I mean,
in Caulfield F1 in the future, what are you going to have?
If you had your choice as team boss, would you have a clear number one, or would you have two equal drivers?
After
2016.
I mean, after 2016, in terms of kind of atmosphere and kind of dynamic and everything, then I think having a clear number one, as long as I think it goes into that, as long as your number two knows what his role is, basically, and he doesn't have kind of, and I think that's maybe what the difficult thing is for a lot of the times, is that no F1 driver is probably going to put their hands up and say, I'm a number two. Like, no one kind of admits to that. And that's sometimes where you get the difficulties. But I think in terms of the atmosphere, if you have I think the ideal one is what we say is you see the Lewis Valtteri partnership. And I think that is probably the best relationship you've seen between drivers, combined with the best team performance and driver performance you're probably going to get.
Well, Bottas just seems to have been very honest about, I don't have that consistency, even corner to corner. It's just not happening. But
then you can also potentially say, though, is that if Bottas was slightly, I don't want to say slightly better because I really rate him, but you've got to say that in 2021, if Mercedes had someone a little bit quicker and a little bit closer to Lewis, he would have taken more points off Verstappen and not put Lewis in the position he was going to be at the end of the season. So you can argue it both ways.
That's your point.
But I'd say from a team point of view, in terms of like an atmosphere, I think a Valtteri Lewis partnership is kind of what you'd be looking for in my future F1 team.
I don't want to get diverted into 2021, but Hamilton had to fight Gasly, Tsunoda, Perez before getting to the final team boss. If he was coming through the back, that is what he had to do. Whereas Bottas he was like a chocolate fire guard defending Bottas. He never just made that killer kind of shunting move.
Great, was he? Yeah. No. I think, and that's what we looked at a number of times. You saw, I think there was a couple, wasn't there, when he was down in P14 or I don't know, and like he made no progress through the field for a start, and then the other times, where it's like trying to, if like the vice versa was coming through, didn't seem to be able to do it. Yeah.
Oh, savage. Hey, I tell you what, people can follow you at the moment because you flip-flop on your Twitter between private and I'm going to tell them. And you're in your phase is I'm going to tell them. So it's worth following you at Mike Caulfield. We'll link to that in the show notes. But how long are we staying non-private for?
It depends until I get annoyed at people commenting stupid stuff to me again.
Oh well, yeah. I mean, that's part of Twitter.
I mean, to be fair, I have stopped mainly reading the comments, but some occasionally they do pop up.
Well, I enjoy your tweets, so I think people should follow you as well, and I think we should have you on here much more and every opportunity we can. We've had to cancel the last two, that's why there's been a bit of a gap, but you're always welcome in the shed. Mike Caulfield.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Now then, here on Missed Apex podcast, you may notice my opinions fluctuating from time to time. So if I was to suddenly become a Stroll fan, if I was suddenly to say that certain tracks definitely do belong on the calendar, it's just that you have to be there to experience it, you can be assured that someone from that event, driver or team has been quite nice to me. On an unrelated note, have you guys checked out NASCAR recently? It seems brilliant to me. I think that only turning left is the right way to go racing. So, here to talk about that is the president of NASCAR team 2311, Steve Lauletta, joining us. I can't believe you are joining us, and I can't believe you have invited me to come down and watch a NASCAR race. Firstly, tell us who you are and why on earth are you letting us spanners in amongst the chicken coop?
It's great to be with you guys. And yeah, I'm the president of 2311, which is a two-car NASCAR team owned by Michael Jordan and Denny Hamlin. Obviously, people know Michael Jordan from his days as a basketball superstar legend, and now the face of the Jordan brand, which is one of the hottest clothing and shoe brands on the planet. And then Denny Hamlin is a three-time Daytona 500 winner who still drives. We actually compete against him every week. And we've built this team here. We're in our fourth season. And I'm just a big fan of all motorsports. I listen to Missed Apex all the time. And I thought, you know what? Who would have a good time seeing how we live on the NASCAR side here in the U.S. as spanners? So dropped you a note to come, and it's going to work out. And I can't wait for you to see what we're all about here in NASCAR.
Oh, that's amazing. And breaking news that Trumpets is going to be along as well, who, as an American, has never been to a NASCAR race. Does that put him in a different camp? Like he's team IndyCar, team single-seater?
I don't know. I'm again, I think anybody that loves motorsports has maybe a formed opinion of what NASCAR is all about. And for somebody that's been around every kind of motorsports there is in my career, it's an unbelievably intense, competitive, and technically advanced form of racing. Not to the level of Formula One, but you guys, once you see the inside of what we do here at our facility, which we call Airspeed, and what we do at the track and preparation, I think you're going to have a pretty eye-opening experience.
Well, what do you feel like on that side, the general impression of NASCAR is from F1 fans? Because we do have a reputation as a fan base of being very insular towards Formula One, especially the Europeans. So, you know, the cliches of, oh, well, it's just turning left, it's just driving in circles. What do you get as our impression of you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. Obviously, we do race on road courses. This year, I think we race on 6 road courses. Our drivers have become very, very good at road course racing, as opposed to in the past where we used to bring these sort of road course ringers in and they used to beat up on the regular guys. That doesn't really happen anymore. But again, the technology in the space that we race in is really advanced. The engineers, the mechanics, the people that work on these cars are as good as any on the planet. We've hired a few from Formula One, other forms of motorsports. Like, they're really interested. It's every race we go to, there's 20-ish cars that could win any weekend. And that's way different than Formula One and even different than IndyCar, right? So it's super competitive, and the pit crews that we have, the drivers that we have, like every little piece of it, it's so hard to win these races. We just won on Sunday, so we're celebrating this week. But we race 38 times a year, and it's a real challenge to be prepared for every different kind of track week in and week out. And you'll see that.
38 races a year, but some of them are on the same weekend.
No, they are not.
You race 38 weekends a year?
Sir.
Okay. So when you hear...
From February to November. We start our season in February, we end in November, and normally have 1 weekend off during that time frame. This year we have 2 weekends off because of the Olympics.
So when you hear F1 complaining about 24 races, your sympathy levels are low?
Yeah, not very high. Now they certainly are a lot more space in between where they race from a geographic perspective. I mean, we race in every part of the United States other than really the Pacific Northwest. So there's a lot of our haulers. We drive to every race with our cars. They'll put about 90,000 miles on each truck. We fly to every race. So logistically is another big challenge of being ready to go week in and week out. But I always joke around that the NASCAR season isn't a sprint. It's not a marathon. It's a death march, and you're just trying to survive.
Yeah, well, one of the things I would like to ask about then is the size of the race team relative to, say, Formula One. And one of the things that I've always enjoyed, and just to be clear, I haven't been in person to a NASCAR race, but I am of an age when I grew up, there were exactly 3 channels you could watch. And if you watched sports on the weekend, you had no choice but to watch NASCAR. And I did. Richard Petty, all those guys, I remember them. So it's not like I'm not a fan. I'm just fallen into a different niche here. But I've always appreciated, especially the pit stops in NASCAR, and the fact that it's so much more dependent on the skill of the people doing it because so many fewer people are allowed.
Yeah, it's much more intense. It looks much more intense, doesn't it? Because the F1 one is like a ballet. Hrum, hadoom, it's all done. But yeah, the NASCAR one is like a war zone.
Yeah, there's a lot of activity. I mean, 2 years ago, NASCAR introduced what they call their next gen car, which we've now been racing. This is the 3rd season. It is different than the way NASCAR was before that. Before that, we built these cars totally from the ground up, bent metal, tubing, had big fabrication facilities. Now we race the same chassis. So there's less people involved in the preparation of the cars. We're a Toyota team. There's 3 manufacturers in NASCAR: Toyota, Chevy, and Ford. Those bodies are different. The engines are different. So that's how you get the competitiveness. But the basic underbody chassis of the car, we all race the same. That's changed the game a lot. That's allowed a new team like us to have fewer people than the previous team or the current older school teams. They could have 300-400 people depending on the number of cars they run. We have about 80 people total that work here at 2311. So we're pretty efficient. We're pretty lean. And you'll see, again, when you come watch what we do, we have 20 minutes of practice. That's it. We go qualify, then we race. We can't test outside of a Goodyear test, which is the official tire of NASCAR. So we're very limited on what we can do on track outside of basically racing. So everything we do is through computer simulation. It's simulation driving on simulator rigs, which we have one here at Airspeed. Toyota obviously has one. So we're doing all the same things as what any other race team is doing. We're just trying to keep up with the type of schedule. The various ovals that we race are all different, obviously, in their age of the track, in the banking, in the size of them. We just raced Talladega, 2.66 miles, 33-degree banking. We're going to Dover, 1 mile. They're all different. So that's what makes this so competitive and challenging.
Definitely from F1 fans in Europe, we do not know the variety of tracks and racing. So doing the research for coming over, I mean, I didn't even realize that there were short tracks or shorter tracks. And having done that in iRacing, that's a completely then different challenge when you're actually having to hit the brakes a little bit harder. But the one that really got me was dirt ovals. I had no idea those big cup cars would then go and do an oval as well.
Yeah, we did that for 3 years at Bristol, which is a concrete track that they put dirt on for 3 years, and now they've stopped doing that. So this year we don't have a dirt race, but we have in the past. But when you come, you're going to come to Darlington, South Carolina, which is one of the oldest tracks that NASCAR has worked on.
Shorter?
It's in what they call It's not a shorter track, but the corners are different. It's real narrow. They say if you don't run that race and have a Darlington stripe when you're at the end of it, you're really not running the right line.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you'll get to see that. But the track itself, it's in the sand hills, as they say, of South Carolina. There's actually seashells in the concrete. That's how they built the track. So as you might imagine, really hard on tires, a lot of degradation. So it's just all that stuff that gets played into it is different every week that we go race, just like in Formula One, the tracks are different: street circuit, permanent circuit, where it is, what the weather is, they're going to rain, not rain. It's all the same. And I'm just really excited for you to see how this most popular racing series in the United States, right? We dwarf Formula One here. Even though Formula One's very popular and has become more popular with Drive to Survive, as you know, there's about 1 million people might watch it on a weekend in the U.S. And in NASCAR, it's at least 3 million almost every weekend. So it's a massively popular form of motorsports, and you should see it.
I'm going to. And I looked up the viewing figures beforehand because if you sort of believe the buzz, F1 has just, overtaken America. And actually, I was surprised that it was as little as 1 million for US Formula One. And so NASCAR's more like 3 million on a given weekend. But you said,
I mean, there's a series, kind of the development series of NASCAR called Xfinity Racing, which is like, F2, F3 for Formula One. Those races garner over 1 million people watching on TV. So NASCAR Cup Series, which is what we race in, is significantly higher. Really, only the NFL, professional football here, and now college football here are the only forms of sport that get significant ratings like NASCAR on a week in, week out basis.
Yeah, so I want to ask about this. You obviously, because of your structure, are going to be a big fan of the whole next gen car, but its run out wasn't exactly free of bumps. Has everyone reached the point of being happy with the way things are now?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we want to do is provide a great entertainment vehicle for fans. And when I say that there's 20 plus people that could win every week, that's true.
What's that
bigger
like?
Teams, bigger teams now who have more resources. And as a NASCAR organization like 2311, we could run up to 4 cars. That's the maximum. We run 2, but there are teams out there that run 4 cars. And so they're amassing double the information that we do when cars are on track, and they're sharing information with their computer simulations and their setups. Those teams obviously are becoming more and more successful. We've had 10 races so far this season, and I believe we've had 7 winners, different winners. So that's the level of what we're all excited about that this car has brought is now it's really in the hands of the driver. It's really in the hands of the pit crew, and executing on a race weekend to win one of these races. If you hit on everything and you're a smaller team, you've got the chance to win. It's just really hard to do, and you've got to have the resources to make sure that you put everybody in a position to be able to do what they do at the highest level. And if they do it great, like we did on Sunday, you win the race.
So I'm going to level accusations at NASCAR. This is F1 perception, because at the weekend we had, the dominant Max Verstappen go and disappear with it. The thing that made the race kind of interesting and bunched it up a little bit were the safety cars, and there was a delay around Bottas's incident causing a VSC and then safety car. But you go, well, now they're bunched up, the race has kind of come back alive. Okay, accusation. Competition cautions in NASCAR are there somewhat deliberately to bunch the track up, to bunch the cars up. Because that's what I'm now suggesting F1 needs to do, given the predictability of the races.
Yeah, we don't have, competition cautions don't happen unless there's a real reason, like weather. Practice was canceled, so the cars have never been on the track. We really don't do those anymore. What we did institute several years ago are stages, and there's stage racing in NASCAR. So it's a way to, and at the end of a stage, it does two things. Points are available, which lead to the championship. Points are available at the end of a stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3, which is the end of the race. So it forces drivers to want to get to the front. They give the top 10 points in a stage. Those top 10 positions pay points.
Oh,
so
mid-race.
You want to you want to be in the top 10 at the end of stage 1 and stage 2 because those points add up. And at the end of the stage, depending on what lap NASCAR chooses, the stage will end. They throw what's a green-white checker, and the field goes under caution. It allows television to go to commercial break. It allows fans in the stands to go get a hot dog or a beer, hit the restroom. So we do have 2 times during the race where we know there's going to be a slowdown in the action, and that's planned. You could call that a competition caution, but when they award points, it really means something. Beyond that, the races play out based on the action on the track. If there are accidents, there's cautions. If there's not, there's not. And you just got to adjust your strategy based on that.
That makes way more sense than my perception of it, which is, well, it's getting a bit strung out and everyone's bored now. So, they touched the wall slightly.
That doesn't happen.
Yeah. Because in F1, like we noted this, Matt, didn't we? When Liberty Media came in, the hair trigger on the safety cars and the red flags, they went through a red flag phase. And I felt that was for the sake of competition. But at least with what you're describing with NASCAR, that's almost leaned into it, embraced it, and go, okay, well, let's make a proper structure around that. And that makes sense a little bit. Because otherwise they would just string out, wouldn't they? And it would be fairly uninteresting.
Yeah, it could. I mean, there were races, we've run road course races where there are no cautions and it gets really spread out. And again, the points are so important in NASCAR racing, especially over this 38-week season that we have, that when they said they're going to award points in these stages, you race, man.
Yeah,
you want to win points during stages because they add up. The last 3 weeks here, Bubba Wallace, our one driver, was 18th in points. He was not securing stage points. He all of a sudden started qualifying up front, running up front to get stage points, and he's 11th in points. He made up 8-9 spots just by having these 50-point days, 45, 50-point days.
Yeah.
It really makes a difference.
That does make sense. And I just love the fact that Americans are honest of, like, well, we need to be entertained. So I don't know how much British sport you watch, but we went through decades of not caring if sport was boring. But a 0-0 draw in football, completely fine.
Yes.
A draw after 5 days of test cricket, completely normal. But Americans are like, no, we demand to be entertained. Sorry, Matt, I beg your pardon.
Well, I just was curious because I remember there being a lot of controversy, not just about the stages, but also about the playoffs in general. And so the longer arc here, has it come into everyone is accepting of it and is enjoying it? Or are there still old school NASCAR fans, which
Holdouts.
there are definitely old school Formula One fans who will complain about the fact that, we have wings or
Points after 6th place.
Yeah,
Diabolical.
exactly. Why do we have points after 6 places? Do you still encounter some of that, or is
100%.
generally everyone now on board?
No. Come on. It's motorsports. Everybody's not on board with anything. Come on, man. You got to complain about, like, again, we just ran the type of racing we run now in super speedways, which are 2.5 mile long oval tracks. We raced in Talladega yesterday. They have become fuel mileage conservation races because what our crew chiefs and engineers, who are the smartest people in this sport, have figured out is if you save fuel in these packs, that means when you come to pit, the shorter amount of time you have on pit lane to fill it up, the more you're going to gain on the racetrack, right? Well, fans are like, we don't want fuel mileage. We don't want them saving. We want them going 100% all the time. Well, that's not how you win. So guess what? We're not going to do that. If that's what, it doesn't matter what you want to have happen. So to your question, are there people that don't like the playoff system? 100% yes, because what happens is we whittle down the playoff field to get to the last race in Phoenix, and there's 4 guys that could win the championship. And the guy that finishes the highest of those four, whether he wins the races, the other finish 2, 3, and 4, or he finishes 15th and the others finish 19, 20, 21, they're going to be the champion. So it really comes down to, we race this 37 weeks to get to that last race. And the person that puts it together on that one day hoists the trophy. So literally, our team could win 37. We could pull over stop, and our team could win 37 races. We could go to Phoenix, and we could, our jackman could fall down on the last pit stop, and we finish 5th, and somebody else is going to win the championship. That's hard for a lot of people to swallow, but it certainly makes it exciting because anybody can win it all the way to the very end.
Sold. We'll take it. Well, yeah, sorry, Verstappen, your lead counts for nothing.
Yeah, I mean, imagine if he would go to the last race, even though he won every race, he goes to the last race, and there's 3 other guys that if they beat him that race and his brake rotor explodes for that particular race, he's not going to be the world champion. It'd be interesting.
Wow, this is making me think of Abu Double. Remember the year they doubled the points in the final race just to try and keep it interesting? So I love that there's all of this commonality we're finding between both the fans and the way the sport is approached. And I know I'm just going to mention it, that you have a new short track aero package. And I'm dying to ask you about that, but I'm not.
No, you can ask. It's okay. You want to make it NASCAR Tech Time, Matt. You make it NASCAR Tech Time.
Right? And I know when you talk about resource management, you mean tires, because if you only have to replace 2 tires instead of 4, you've also got a big advantage there. But I'm not going to get into that. What I'm really curious about, you mentioned, okay, fine, I will get into it. But first, I want to ask about this. You mentioned there's 20 people who could win any race. Now, in Formula One, there's loads of strategy simulations and softwares, and we're looking at a race that essentially 1 or maybe 2 people can win. Do you run the same kind of strategy simulation? And if so, like how hard is it to figure out what's going to happen in a race? Because often I watch and it seems like you have to be skillful, but you also got to be really kind of lucky that nothing takes you out on the way to the finish line.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, what does Mike Tyson say? Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And then the plan changes. So yeah, we run thousands and thousands of hours of computer simulations. We're working with, some of our biggest partners to build new models, whether they're data evaluation models, AI modeling to be able to predict when cautions are going to happen and what's going to happen to tire degradation. All that stuff is new to this sport or newer to this sport. Again, we're in our 4th season. Last year, we hired a data scientist, a data engineer. We're building out that part of 23XI's business because that's where this is going. And it's going to make it even more important to try to be able to predict those things and get ahead of everybody else. That's going to leapfrog the competition because all the people we race against are trying to do the same thing. We're just trying to do it on our own. We're trying to do it as a group of Toyota teams because we want, if we could, there's let's see, 6, 8 Toyota cars on the racetrack. If we could be running 1 through 8 and just beat the hell out of each other to find out who wins, that's way better than having to race all the Chevys and all the Fords at the same time. So manufacturer groups are really doing a better job of working together.
That's
and we have more than that, right? So if Mercedes, because my wife's a big Lewis fan, if they're going to work together, it's just 2 people, right? It's 2 teams. We've got really to work on 8 of them because that's the Toyota thing.
Sort of. I mean, you'd never catch Mercedes, I don't know, running an engine experiment on a junior driver at another team, allegedly, guessing. I mean, I think it's more frowned upon. And you could talk about some teams, taking off one team shirt one day and then going into a customer team and putting on their team shirt. Again, allegedly, no proof. Yeah. But I like actually that it's much more open, that you can kind of go, no, we're all working together. We can run 8 setups this weekend and see what is better. Sorry, Matt.
Well, one of the things that I have when I watch NASCAR absolutely enjoyed is the team pit stop strategies, where all the engine manufacturers will come in at the same time because they have similar usage of fuel.
Yeah, that happens on mostly on those super speedway races that I talked about because it's a pack race. So you need to stay together to maximize the draft. And if you pit on your own, and you can't come out and stay ahead of the rest of the group, so your manufacturers will pit together. When we get to a place like Darlington, where you guys are going to be coming, you won't see that very much, because strategies are different, cars are handling different, you're running in different positions. So it really, that's a track dependent type of thing. But you did bring up, Matt, you brought up pit stops before. I mean,
Yes.
these guys that we have, 5 people go over the wall. NASCAR pit stops are now down into the 8.5, 9-second range. And those guys are running around the car. They're not just standing in front of one wheel.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Tires. We did go with this next gen car to a single lug nut versus it used to be 5 lug nuts. So that's been part of speeding up the total pit stop. But the people we hire are former college athletes here, professional athletes, Army, U.S. veterans, like people that have this desire to be really competitive. They're not they don't work on our cars. They purely fly, hit the car, and go home and work out at the gym and in practice. It used to be kind of like Formula One.
F1,
the guy that was the interior guy was also pouring gas in the car. We don't do that anymore. And years where we separate these dedicated athletes that run around this car and do 8, 9, 10-second pit stops is a totally separate skill set and profession. They get paid very well to do it.
Oh,
and again, you see those guys and get to meet them on what they do. You'll see where they work out here at Airspeed. Like, it's the best of the best. We just hired our head of athletic performance who worked for an NBA, National Basketball Association team, and he walked into our gym facility and was like, "This is better than what we had at the NBA team." So like,
cool. I'll get to see that.
It's advanced. You sure will.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, now I'm thinking of the pit stops as like a sport. That's the first thing you notice is the people running around, and it's a little quicker than I thought. And when you look at even the pop culture movies, Talladega Nights, that kind of thing, Days of Thunder, you know, there's much more of a focus on that, whereas the Derricks of the F1 pit crew kind of get lost in the background. I think they shield them from that quite deliberately. But I've got one more accusation. Well, I'm attacking NASCAR, and you're there with a shield ready to defend, is the lack of skill. So I have jumped on, because it's only going in circles, Steve. There's not even any corners. But when I've jumped on the sim, even for street stocks and Legends Cup cars on short ovals, jumped in the sim in VR with headphones on. It's an assault on the senses that you don't get in single-seater racing. So single-seater racing, you're on your own more, and it's you versus the corner. Whereas in an oval pack, you suddenly realize every turn is different because you've got different feel and grip around each corner, but every turn is different because sometimes you've got a car on the outside, sometimes you're in the draft, sometimes you're on your own, and it's just it's a mental sport.
Not only is it a mental sport, it's a massively physical sport. We're racing 400 miles, 500 miles, which if it's a 400-mile race on a 1-mile oval, that's 400 laps, and these guys are in these cars for 3.5 hours, sometimes almost 4 hours. And, we're racing at 80, 90, track temperatures of 120 degrees. They are fighting these cars, to your point, through these corners with massive traffic and, tires going away and fuel loads being different, and, the aerodynamics on the cars by lap being different, whether you're up front, middle of the pack, getting all the dirty air in the back of the pack. I mean, it's amazing the mental toughness and physical toughness these drivers have, because they are doing things in these cars that just doesn't feel like they should be able to, and they're doing it for an amount of time that would make anybody's head fall off their shoulders. So again, when you see the speed, the one thing that I always tell people, like, television does not give speed justice. You have to see speed in person. And when you see these cars going around an oval, like you will see them at the speed they're doing, it is unbelievable how fast they're going, and they carry that speed through these corners. They're not letting up much. They're letting up enough to be able to make the corner, but it's all out all the time.
And is it power steering or is it no power steering? Because honestly, I don't know the answer.
Yeah, they have some power steering. Yeah, it's not kind of like an Indy car or an open wheel car where it's, they're muscling it as much as those guys do. But it's still tremendously physical for them in a car with the G forces and the amount that they do. It's not full power steering by any stretch, so they're really having to work the wheel as well as everything else they've got to do in that car.
Okay, so you've mentioned that I'll be able to jump into the sim that the drivers use.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to show off a little bit because I'm fancy. I've got a SimuCube Sport 2 wheel here that can go to 17 Newton meters. Do you happen to know the wheel strength that the drivers are having to?
Come on, man. I told you I'm not the technical guy.
Okay, but I'm going to crank it up. I'm going to crank it up to maximum and really build up my resistance to it because I don't want to embarrass myself in your sim.
You'll be fine.
I'll train to have the arms of Garth in preparation.
Yeah,
you'll be good.
So I want to ask a little bit more about running in the draft, because it's as a former cyclist, it can be harder than it looks to keep your position, especially if you're near the back. Is it just a matter of experience of your driver, knowing when to go, whether to go high, whether to go low, when it's okay to pop out and try and get around someone? It just, like, I can't even begin to grasp how that information gets relayed.
Yeah, we do have spotters that are a big part of our team. So the spotters are up on the roof as high as they can get at every racetrack, and they're basically the driver's eyes, because as you see in Formula One, we have the same thing. Protecting the safety of our drivers is number one importance for NASCAR, for us as teams. So it's not like they can move their head a bunch and see what's going on around them. So where you're in the draft doing this, you've got somebody that's your eyes above telling you whether you're clear, not clear around the entire racetrack. But it is a feel. Like they know when it's getting to the point where they feel they need to bail out of the draft and live to fight another lap. They know when they need to pop out and get to the front because their car is handling at the right point for them to do that. So the guys that are the best at it, and we've got one in Bubba Wallace, and obviously Tyler Reddick's really good at it because he just won on Sunday. They learn that they can, whether they can feel the air or not, they know how to manage that, whether they're running, just two cars and how to leverage the air, side drafting, and the force to be able to get by somebody, make them a little looser or tighter, depending on what they want to do. That's how you'll reference cars in terms of their handling capabilities when you're in NASCAR loose and tight. You'll be able to see that as they manage their race from behind the wheel.
Right, I've taken exactly double the amount of your time that I asked for, so my sincere apologies, but please take that as a sign of how interested I was in your answers, and I hope we'll hear more from you. So I am going to produce a normal, show on the Missed Apex feed, which is, Spanners, Experiences, NASCAR, in which I hope you'll be able to give us some more information, and hopefully, the Missed Apex guys, the listeners, I know they would be interested if we could grab techs, mechanics, pit crew. They'd love to hear from all those guys as well.
Yes, absolutely. I want you to experience everything. I want you to tell your listeners about everything, because it's something that I hope others will be curious enough about and want to come hang out with us. We're, like I said, a brand new team. We want people to look at you with your Haas hat on it.
Yeah, I was gonna say I need a 2311 cap to replace this one.
Yeah, we'll get y'all set up. But yeah, we want people to come and at least explore and have the same sort of interest in it as I do for Formula One and other global series, because we're all gearheads at heart, and we're all trying to watch cars at the peak of performance, and drivers do things we all wish we could do, and we try to do at some level, whether behind our passenger car wheel or in simulations like you play around in. I think you're gonna have a blast, and you're gonna want to come back.
You don't play a sim, you drive a sim. But okay, we don't need to fight over that.
It's
not a game.
It's not a game.
It's a sim. It's a sim.
Are you getting paid to do it?
I'm just saying it's a sim. We don't have to fall out over that now fully. Steve Lauletta, president of 2311 NASCAR team. Who is your F1 equivalent? So who would you be if you were the F1 character?
I don't know who I'd be. Be a team principal of some sort. I kind of like the seriousness of Toto. I like the fun of Fred. I like all of them. My friend Gunther Steiner came over to see our new facility last week. He's always fun to be around. So I really respect and appreciate what those guys are doing. They run massive team businesses, very successful, great partners, and we're trying to do the same thing here. And as a new team, we're well on our way to get to those levels as well.
So maybe Zach Brown. Maybe that's the most analogous one, given your background as well, perhaps.
Maybe. I know Zach. I played golf with Zach. He's an interesting character.
We made a bet. We said who would be the best team principal to go drinking with out of the team management, and we reckoned it would be Zach Brown. I reckon he knows how to have a good time.
100% agree with you.
There's a barbecue in there somewhere. I'm convinced of it. Steve, thank you so much for your time, and we can't wait to see you in Darlington.
See you then.
Well, that's all for our midweek drop-in. I hope you're enjoying them. We certainly have fun making them. Definitely less canon than the Sunday shows. Obviously, take them or leave them, but we hope that you will download them and enjoy them and share with your friends. Share the link, missedapexpodcast.com, with your friends at work or on your Facebooks and stuff. It's your neighbors. Post notes through their doors saying, hey, check out Missed Apex Podcast, or we'll send round... No, don't threaten them. Don't threaten your neighbors, but do recommend it to your friends. Until we see you next, work hard, be kind, and threaten your neighbors to listen to Missed Apex Podcast.